Seraphine Voss had not seen the sky in 3 years, 1 month and 12 days. She knew the number because she had counted every single one. In the far corner of her stone cell, just above the waterline where the wall stayed dry, she had scratched thin lines into the rock with the edge of a broken meal tray. 1 line for each day, 1,104 lines in total. She did not know why she kept counting. Hope had left her a long time ago, but the counting remained, and it was something to do with her hands when the silence pressed too hard against her ears. The cell was underground, beneath the main training compound of the Blackthorn Pack. It was not a dungeon in the dramatic sense. There was a cot with a thin mattress, a wool blanket that had been washed so many times it was nearly see-through, a small drain in the floor, and a ventilation gap near the ceiling no wider than her forearm. Light came through that gap in thin ribbons during the day and disappeared entirely at night. She had learned to sleep in the dark without fear. She had learned a great many things down here that she would never have chosen to learn otherwise. She was 22 years old. She had been brought here at 19, after the 3rd incident in which her wolf had refused, actively, visibly, and in front of witnesses, to submit to the command of an alpha elder. In the pack world, submission was not considered optional. It was the structure on which everything rested. Alphas led, betas organized, omegas softened and steadied the emotional temperature of the group. That was the order. That was how it had always been. Seraphine's wolf had not received that particular explanation. Every time an alpha had raised their voice in command around her, her wolf had simply looked at them. Not with aggression, not with challenge, with a calm, level silence that said, without a single word, that whatever they were offering was not something she recognized as authority. The elders called it a defect. Elder Magistra Dorn, who had made the final decision about the cell, called it a danger to pack stability. She had not been unkind about it. She had explained, in measured tones, that an omega who could not submit created confusion in the social structure that could unravel years of careful pack order. She said it the way a person says something they have already decided is necessary, and would prefer not to discuss further. Seraphine had not argued. She had looked at Dorn the same way her wolf looked at alphas. Dorn had not enjoyed that. In the years that followed, Seraphine was kept. That was the only word for it. She was given food twice a day, clean water, occasional changes of clothing, and once a month, a guard named Finn would bring her a book. Finn was young, maybe 20, and he always slid the book under the door quickly, as though hoping she would not notice the kindness in the gesture and make it awkward. She noticed. She never mentioned it. The books were the only reason she still thought in full sentences. She was not mistreated. She was simply erased. That was the thing about being locked underground, that people who had never experienced it did not understand. It was not the darkness that wore you down. It was the forgetting, the slow, grinding certainty that the world above had continued without you, that seasons had turned, and people had aged, and nothing up there had paused to wonder where you went. You became theoretical, a problem that had been solved by being placed somewhere it could not be seen. She was thinking about this on the morning of day 1105, when she heard the guards' voices change. She had learned to read the sounds above her, the way a sailor reads weather. She knew the relaxed shuffle of the morning shift change, the heavier footfall of the weapons master crossing the yard, the specific creak of the north gate when it opened for supply deliveries. She knew all of it. So when she heard voices go tight and uncertain in a way they never did during ordinary routine, she sat up on her cot and went very still. Something was wrong, or something was different. In her experience, those two things were usually the same. Then the ground moved. Not violently, not with any noise. It was a deep, rhythmic vibration that came up through the stone floor and into the soles of her bare feet. Slow, deliberate, footsteps, one pair, unhurried in a way that suggested the person making them had never once in their life needed to hurry. Her wolf, who spent most of her time lying flat and exhausted at the back of Seraphine's chest, like an animal that had simply given up moving, lifted her head. Seraphine noticed. She noticed because it had not happened in years. She stood up. She did not know why. She stood up and crossed the cell and pressed her back against the wall beside the iron door, the way she had trained herself to stand whenever footsteps approached, because it put her at an angle where she could see without being immediately seen. Old habit. Useful habit. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Silence. Then a voice came through the iron. It was low and even, unhurried in exactly the same way the footsteps had been. It sounded like a voice that had said a great many things over a very long time and had learned to choose its words accordingly. "You have been waiting a long time," the voice said. "I am sorry for that. I only recently understood where you were." Seraphine said nothing. Her wolf was fully upright now, still not aggressive, still not submissive, but present in a way she had not been in 3 years. Alert. Like something recognizing a sound it had heard once before, long ago, and had been trying to remember ever since. "You do not have to speak," the voice continued, as though her silence were a perfectly reasonable response that required no correction. "I only wanted you to know I am here." She heard Elder Dorn's voice then, further down the corridor, fast and sharp in the way people speak when they are trying to manage something that is moving faster than they can keep up with. "This is highly irregular," Dorn was saying. "We have protocols for access to this level. There is a formal request process. There are forms. There are reasons." "I am certain there are," the voice said, without any hostility and without any particular interest. "Step aside, please." There was a pause. Then Seraphine heard Dorn step aside. She had never, in all her time in this compound, heard Elder Magistra Dorn step aside for anyone. Footsteps again, and then Finn's voice, very young and very careful, saying, "Sir, this lock requires authorization from—" "Open it." Just 2 words, and Finn opened it. The door swung inward. Seraphine did not move from her position against the wall. She stood with her spine straight and her chin level, and her arms crossed, and she looked at the man in the doorway, the way her wolf looked at everything, with a calm, measuring quiet that offered nothing and asked for nothing. He was tall. He stood in the doorframe, with a stillness that was different from the stillness of someone who was being careful. It was the stillness of something that had existed long enough to no longer feel the need to fill space with unnecessary movement. His hair was dark, his eyes were the deep gray-green of water under heavy cloud, and his face carried the particular quality of someone who had seen so much for so long that surprise had become essentially impossible for them. He looked at her. She looked at him. He did not look at her with pity, which she had expected. He did not look at her with authority, which she had prepared for. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately name, and then she recognized it, because she had read about it once in one of Finn's books. It was the expression of someone arriving somewhere they had been trying to reach for a very long time. "Your wolf never submitted," he said, "because she was waiting for her equal, not for her master." The silence after those words was complete. Seraphine's jaw tightened. She was not going to let a sentence, however precisely aimed, crack open something she had spent 3 years carefully sealing shut. She was practical. She was unsentimental. She had survived this long by keeping her interior life very small and very protected. But her wolf exhaled. It was not a dramatic thing. It was quiet, like a long breath let out, after holding it for so long that the body had stopped registering the tension, like something putting down a weight it had been carrying alone in the dark. Seraphine felt it. She kept her face still. But she felt it. Behind the man in the doorway, she could see Elder Dorn standing in the corridor. Dorn's face had gone to a particular kind of stillness that Seraphine recognized as the expression people wore when they understood too late that they had made a significant error. "Who are you?" Seraphine said. It was not entirely a question. It was the opening move of someone gathering information before they committed to anything. "Kalion," he said. And then, because she waited, "Some call me the unmoved. I have never particularly liked it, but no one asked." She had not heard that name in the cell. She had heard it once, years before, in a history lesson she had barely paid attention to, about the oldest bloodlines in the pack world. Bloodlines so old they predated the current council structure entirely. Bloodlines from a time when the wolves themselves had been different, more connected to something ancient, something that operated on different rules entirely. "You came here for me," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you exist, and you have been hidden, and those two facts together are not acceptable." She studied him for a long moment. You do not know me. No, he agreed. Not yet. She looked around the cell, at the tally marks on the wall, at the stack of Finn's books in the corner, at the thin blanket on the cot that had kept her alive through 3 winters underground. She looked at it all the way you look at something you are deciding whether to carry or leave behind. She left it. She walked across the cell to the doorway. He moved aside without being asked, giving her the full width of the frame, and she walked through it and into the corridor, and she stood in the corridor, under its higher ceiling, and breathed in air that had slightly more movement in it than the air in her cell, and that small difference, after 3 years, was enough to make her close her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. Elder Dorn was standing 6 feet away. They looked at each other. There was a great deal that could have been said. There was history between them, and injury, and years of silence that had been chosen by one and endured by the other. Seraphine looked at her and said nothing, and then looked away, because Dorn had already used more of her attention than she deserved. Finn was standing further back, against the wall, holding the key ring. He looked like someone braced for a consequence. Seraphine looked at him and gave him the smallest possible nod. Not forgiveness, not accusation, just acknowledgement that he had been the one decent thing down here, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. He exhaled quietly. She turned toward the stairs. She walked up them without holding the railing. Her legs were thinner than they should have been, and her body had the careful quality of something that had been kept still for too long, but she walked steadily, and she did not stumble. Kalian walked behind her, not guiding her, not directing her, simply present. At the top of the stairs was a door, and beyond the door was the main corridor of the training compound, and at the end of that corridor was the outer door, and beyond the outer door was the yard, and beyond the yard was the gate, and beyond the gate was the world. She walked through all of it. The guards in the yard stared. She did not look at them. She crossed the packed earth of the training ground with her back straight and her face calm, past the supply building she had never entered, and the Alpha quarters she had never been permitted near, and the great carved stone marker at the center of the yard that bore the Blackthorn Pack crest, which had once represented something she had wanted to belong to, and now represented nothing she needed. At the gate, a senior warrior moved to block the exit. He was big, and he wore the expression of someone doing what they had been told to do, and trying not to think too much about who they were doing it to. Kalian did not speak. He simply looked at the warrior. Whatever the warrior saw in that look, he moved. Seraphine walked through the gate. She stopped on the other side, not because she was hesitating, because the air was different, and the sky was above her, actually above her, open and gray and wide and enormous, and she had forgotten, in some very deep part of herself, that the sky was that large. She stood for a moment, and let the fact of it settle over her like something being returned. Then she breathed in. The air tasted of pine, and coming rain and distance. 3 things that had not existed in her world for over 3 years. She held the breath for a moment, and then released it slowly, and as she did, something small and hard, that had been living in the center of her chest since the day they locked the cell door behind her, loosened very slightly, like a knot that has been worked at long enough to finally start moving. Kalian came to stand beside her. Not in front, not behind, beside. Her wolf noted it. Did not react with the electric, overwhelming rush she had read about in the books Finn had given her. Instead, her wolf simply turned her head toward his, the way you turn toward a sound you have been half hearing for a long time, and have finally located. They did not speak. There was a great deal unknown between them still, and a long road ahead, and many things that would need to be navigated slowly and with care, because nothing that had been damaged over 3 years was going to heal in an afternoon. But the sky was there, the trees were there, dark and enormous along the tree line at the edge of the clearing. The road out of Blackthorn territory ran north between them. Seraphine looked at it. She kept walking.